It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Keir Starmer arrives in Washington for a NATO summit with a cast-iron promise to raise defence spending.
What we spend that money on, though, is really important, how we spend it. That's why the Strategic Defence Review that will be announced next week will look at those threats that we're facing and how we work with our allies.
But should the new government be moving faster to boost our defences? Also today...
Who do you think the next leader should be?
The Conservative election post-mortem continues. Can the party recover? And Reform UK's new MPs take their seats in Parliament. We talk to the party's chairman. Joining us today, Labour MP Barry Gardiner, Conservative peer Stuart Jackson, broadcaster and journalist Andrew Marr, and The Sun's Noah Hoffman. This is Politics Live. Welcome. Well, what's known as swearing in Parliament or swearing into Parliament, that continues today. We can see the ongoing procession of MPs. We'll show you on your screens. This started yesterday. A record number of new MPs are being inducted in the House of Commons. After the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, was re-elected yesterday, MPs were sworn in by order of seniority. Leaders of all of the parties represented in Parliament were given the opportunity to speak. Some of the short speeches were actually quite funny, but we're going to listen to part of what the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak, had to say as they addressed the Speaker.
You preside over a new Parliament, the most diverse Parliament by race and gender this country has ever seen. And I'm proud of the part that my party has played in that, proud of the part that every party has played in that, including in this intake, the largest cohort of LGBT plus MPs of any parliament in the world.
Yeah. Can I start by congratulating the Prime Minister on his election victory? And as he takes on his formidable task, he and his family deserve the good wishes of all of us in this House. Yeah. Now, in our politics, we can argue vigorously, as the Prime Minister and I did over the past 6 weeks, but still respect each other. And whatever disputes we may have in this Parliament, I know that everyone in this House will not lose sight of the fact that we are all motivated by our desire to serve our constituents, our country, and advance the principles that we honourably believe in.
So all very civilised in Parliament, handover of power, as is often the case at these big parliamentary moments. And Andrew, I suppose Sir Keir Starmer can afford to be magnanimous in victory and Rishi Sunak gracious in defeat. We've heard a lot from Keir Starmer about duty and about service. Politics is going to be more cordial, he says, as is the political discourse. How long will it last?
Not very long. I don't want to spoil the mood, but this is the great day of parliamentary humbug, when everybody pretends to be terribly nice to everybody else. And, you know, Rishi Sunak, who was pretty snippy and tetchy during the election campaign, he finds the gears marked sort of dignity and grace. As is expected. But, yeah, we had Keir Starmer being terribly nice to Diane Abbott and Diane Abbott almost accepting it and vice versa. And this goes on right across the Commons. But we shouldn't take today terribly seriously.
Right.
Or yesterday, I should say.
Well, yes, and it's ongoing, of course. I mean, Noah, how much getting used to will it take for Conservatives, Tories, as they were in government for 14 years, and there they are on the opposition benches and a much reduced number?
I don't think they will be able to fully get used to being in opposition until they've sorted out the leadership issue, and they're right to take their time to do that. But really, in order to be an effective opposition to Keir Starmer, the Tory party need an identity, and they don't yet have that. They need a set of values and principles that they are going to use to convince the public of why they can be trusted again. And until that identity is formed, until this reincarnation happens, I don't see how we can have a proper, strong opposition.
Right. Well, interestingly, if we just have a look at this headline in The Times, Kemi Badenoch, in the shadow cabinet, obviously a potential leadership contender, rips into Rishi Sunak over election blunders. Yes, it seems in the first shadow cabinet meeting, Stuart, Kemi Badenoch said it was almost unconscionable unconstitutional for Rishi Sunak to have called that election over. But the so-called psychodrama, as many Conservatives themselves have talked about, seems to be breaking out yet again, even within shadow cabinet.
Yes, and although I agree with her analysis, and I think she's spot on, I do deprecate the fact that this first meeting of the shadow cabinet, which is an interim shadow cabinet, has been leaked to the Times, and we know who used to leak from cabinet to the Times, but I won't say.
Please do.
It wouldn't be politic to say, but I do agree with Noah that you know, frankly, you know, it was only last week. The public don't want to see the Conservatives. They're fed up with them. The election was an emphatic rejection, and we don't have to rush into creating a new party with new policies and a new manifesto. We should take our time. And this idea that it's business as usual, let's be terribly polite to each other, it's for the birds, really. There has to be a cathartic, dare I say it, bloodletting moment where people are told, you made big mistakes, you made big policy mistakes, and you made mistakes on the election, for instance. And that has to be, and that's healthy, and that's what all parties will have after a bad defeat like the one we suffered.
Right, bloodletting. In what sort of form are you thinking that should take?
Well, I do think there has to be an accountability for having the worst election result in 100 years, or perhaps ever. I don't think we can say the pendulum will swing back, the voters were just a bit grumpy. It's not just about the leadership. It's about our policies on social care, on the NHS, on education, on immigration. It's about that solemn contract with the voters that we made, the promises we made that we broke, and I think we've just got to address that.
Right, otherwise it's existential.
Yes, potentially it is, because we've got no right to own the right of centre mandate and franchise in British politics. And we need to understand that I'm a Conservative, I want us to win again, but I also want us to be honest with ourselves and the electorate.
It was a hugely chaotic, selfish, zigzagging period of power by the Conservatives, and I think...
And long.
And the worst election campaign ever fought by a modern democratic party in this country. Absolutely appalling, and there has to be accountability. But picking up what Noah was saying, I don't see how the Conservatives can choose their next leader until they decide a couple of really big existential questions, of which the first is, do we warmly embrace Nigel Farage? Do we wrap our arms around him, or do we try and kill him? Until they know what the answer to that is, I don't see how they can choose a leader.
Stuart?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think we have fetishised the leadership and this idea of the great leader presenting the tablets of stone to the membership and the parliamentary party for too long. It's not about the leadership. It's fundamentally about what we believe in and what we have to offer as a governing party to the British people. And that's as important as who occupies the post of Leader of the Opposition.
Just before I come to Barry, who do you think that should be? Do you have anyone in mind?
I guessed you might ask me that, Jo.
Really, well done.
I think it's too early to say. I think...
Well, you know who they're going to be.
Yes, but I
Robert Jenrick,
honesty...
Kemi Badenoch, Victoria Atkins, Priti Patel.
Well, it won't be Victoria Atkins. I won't be supporting Victoria Atkins. But I have to say, it's about honesty, being candid, being authentic, and actually articulating long-standing, enduring Conservative values and beliefs.
I forgot Suella Braverman, or is she no longer?
James Cleverly.
And Tom
Tugendhat.
Oh, and Tom Tugendhat. Oh, thank you. There is that very long
I'm
list.
not likely to vote for Tom Tugendhat.
And Suella?
I would want to see what Suella's agenda is and what her programme is. Whether she's actually the only...
She was quite explicit. Yesterday we played quite a big section
fairness,
of her.
Whatever Miss Badenoch says about her, she at least articulated a difference of opinion with what was obviously a failing government and a failing campaign.
I will come to you, Barry, I promise.
Please,
I'm sure.
I love seeing
you're enjoying. You don't want to intrude.
The psychodrama play out.
Intrude on private grief.
Yes,
clearly. Why won't you be supporting? You've said so definitively, Victoria Atkins or Tom Tugendhat?
I just don't think they've got the answers. I think they played a part in what was a disastrous government and a disastrous campaign. Personally, I don't feel that they have the solutions to what is an existential crisis and a threat from reform.
All right. Barry, of course, the Labour Party went through similar I don't know, difficulties, let's put it that way, in 2019. And Sir Keir Starmer became leader, and as he has said endlessly and repeatedly, he's changed the party. Any advice for Stuart Jackson and his Conservative colleagues?
Well, Stuart said it's going to take a long time. And all I'm going to say, Stuart, is please, could you make it as long as 5 years before you get it sorted out? That would be very helpful to us.
I forgot to mention the word helpful advice, yes.
Look, I think actually what Andrew said is entirely right. And it's not just the Conservative Party that needs to be extremely wary of the fragmentation of our electoral system at the moment. It's also the Labour Party. Because we know that we've got this wonderful majority, and I'm thrilled, you know, it really does enable you to do things in government when you've got that big majority. But equally, we should be aware that if you had added the seats, or the votes rather, for reform and the votes for the Conservative Party, in many of those seats, we would not have actually won. And that means that we have a thin majority from the point of view of electoral politics.
Well, as they said, it's shallow and wide. We're going to talk about this in more detail later on, but Andrew.
Very, very important to remember that in this election, only 60% of the people who actually voted either Labour or Conservative. And if you take the entire electorate, only a fifth of people voted for the government that won this huge majority. We have to remember that.
Right, well, let's talk about one of the issues that was discussed during the campaign and is now very much one of the top items on the agenda, certainly, of course, at Nato. Let me show you this headline, BBC News. Prime Minister says defence spending commitment is cast iron. Keir Starmer, we can show you on the plane, was discussing this with political journalists as he travelled over to Washington. There they are, all hanging on his every word, all looking very jovial. But when he talks about this cast iron commitment of spending 2.5% of our national income on defence, he hasn't put a timeline on it. He hasn't said by when. The Conservatives have said it would be by 2030 if they had won the election. And there is going to be what we call a strategic review of defence, and the Labour government has said they want to do that first before they set out that timeline. Let's speak to former military intelligence officer Philip Ingram. Welcome to you. You are reported in the papers today as saying that the new government is playing with fire on defence spending. What did you mean exactly?
Well, if we look at what's happening globally with the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, supported by NATO, with the instability in the Middle East, with what China's doing in Southeast Asia, you know, we are on a pre-conflict path. We're not post-war, and therefore spending on defence should be started as soon as is possible and then tweaked by a defence review. You know, John Healey has been the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence since 2020. He's been given access to lots of the briefs that he needed to pre-plan, and he will understand exactly where the gaps are in defence. And a lot of those are in getting our defence industrial base right. That takes a lot of time to get put into place, and those commitments should be made today and then built on, depending on what comes out of the defence review.
Right, so you are saying clearly that the Labour government shouldn't wait until that defence review is carried out and completed before making that commitment in terms of allocating money now.
Yes, very much so. And what that would do as well is send an extremely clear message to Vladimir Putin and to the Grand Ayatollah in Iran and to Xi Jinping in China that the UK is properly committed, not just in words, but in cash, in increasing our military capability. Waiting until the defence review comes out, and I saw one of the defence ministers this morning in an interview not say how long this is going to take. So it's open-ended at the moment. We don't have that time. You know, it takes a lot of time to build defence capability. Our military is in a very, very poor state at the moment, and it's going to take an awful lot of time to fix it.
Well, you mentioned that it's in a very poor state. So what would that money be used for?
That's a really difficult question to answer. There's a lot of different areas where it needs to be used. We're hemorrhaging people. We can't get enough people through the door. So there needs to be money spent in sorting that out. That is relatively easy to do and could be done relatively quickly. Our ammunition stocks, as we heard from the outgoing Chief of the General Staff, are woefully low. That is something that could give could be set up very quickly by guaranteeing money into our defence industrial base so that ammunition can be manufactured. And then, of course, we're only converting 148 of our Challenger 2 to Challenger 3 tanks. Poland, who've got a smaller defence budget, are buying 1,000 tanks. We've got no tracked artillery capability, 155mm artillery capability.
Yes.
And there's lots more across the Air Force.
I was going to say, that
the
sounds
Navy.
like a fairly extensive list of equipment and people, as you say. Philip Ingram, thank you very much for joining us. Well, you've heard everything that Philip Ingram has to say. And in terms of the dangerous world that we are living in, just to take two theatres of war, whether it's Ukraine and Russia or the Middle East, shouldn't Labour just commit now to spending 2.5% of our national income on defence by 2030?
Joe, let's be clear. In 2010, the last Labour government was spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. Since then, no Conservative government has spent that amount. Right? We have now again committed to spending 2.5%.
Yes, but...
And the point that Mr. Ingram made, when you asked him, well, what should that money be spent on? He said, well, that's difficult to say. The reason it's difficult to say is you need a defence review to know exactly how best...
But you can still commit. Why can't you commit to spending it by that time and still have your defence review?
We've committed to spending 2.5%. What we're now doing is we're seeing how that money can best be spent. Now, I also want to tackle what Mr. Ingram said about sending a message to Vladimir Putin, right? Because that is really important in what's going on in Ukraine. That's why John Healey, day one of a Labour government, then said, right, 90 Brimstone missiles, the anti-armour missiles, they're on their way to you. That's why he said 250,000 rounds, 50 caliber rounds, are on their way to you. That's why we are sending them 61 bulldozers, because that is building the defences that are required.
Right, well,
so the idea that we're not sending a message to Vladimir Putin over Ukraine is absolutely for the birds.
But there is still this big question mark, Barry. I
Where
want to
was
bring in
Mr.
the
Ingram when, in fact, the Conservative Party were not spending the money that they should have been doing in building up the stockpile of ammunition? He wasn't on the television complaining then. He's come out now as a right-wing commentator
So you think it's ideological and political?
I think he should have been saying this for the past 14 years.
He's not alone, though. He's not alone. Well, there is some truth in that, because actually even the Conservatives, when you were in government, only came to 2.5% by 2030 in April this year. And before that, do you accept the criticism of hollowing out our defences?
I was going to be very consensual and try and be collaborative and say that I was really pleased that John Healey's been chosen as Defence Secretary, because I couldn't have thought of a better person. And, you know, Labour were the party of Nato, and they supported the independent nuclear deterrent before and they had sensible policies, and there was a bipartisan approach before the crazy Corbyn years over the last 10 years. What I would say is they're not mutually exclusive concepts. To launch a defence review and also say because of the imperative of time, needing to deal with these huge geopolitical issues such as Ukraine, the rise of China, etc., and, of course, the Trump presidency, which is going to be another geopolitical complication, that we now, today, use our big majority, reach across to the Conservatives and other parties to actually commit to 2.5%. And the Labour government should do that.
Andrew?
Just a couple of lines. Barry is absolutely right that defence was hollowed out under the Conservatives. I sat for year after year talking defence secretaries and chiefs of the General Staff, interviewing them, and they said the army's not going to come down below this figure or that figure, and it went down and down and down. But let's be also clear, a cast iron commitment by the Prime Minister on defence spending with no timescale is not a cast iron commitment. And the real danger here is that the Treasury's comprehensive spending review, the CSR, takes place before the defence review, and it will be the Treasury who decides how much money is spent, and it won't be enough.
Noah?
Yeah, I completely agree. And just back to this point about defence under the Conservatives, even it sounds quite basic, but issues like military accommodation. I was on FaceTime to one of my friends who is in the military, and I thought he was living in a prison cell. It was disgusting. They're not asking for a 5-star hotel, but they're asking for some sense of basic humanity. And then we question why, you know, the military is bleeding people, and all of this did happen under a Conservative government. So, of course, it is all very well and good for James Cartledge to come out and really press for Keir Starmer to make his commitment to 2.5% cast iron, to have this money available now. But there is a huge issue with what happened to the armed forces under the Conservatives as well.
Will it, though, be one of those issues that would rally the Conservatives in opposition, the idea of the 2.5% of spending?
Yes, I think it is one of the few issues at the moment where the party is united. And, compare that to an issue like housing, where half of the surviving Tory MPs are campaigning to stop building more homes. The other half are saying we need to build them quicker. It is good that on this one issue, national security, they do seem united.
But no, they weren't. Were they? For 14 years, they didn't argue amongst themselves over getting to 2.5. They just didn't do it.
Well, but Barry, can I just put this to you, because this is obviously an alternative view when it comes to defence spending. Diane Abbott, now Mother of the House, Labour MP. There's no surprise that ex-military types and lobbyists for arms makers want more spending on the military. But Labour must have other priorities: the NHS, schools, housing, universal free school meals, an end to the two-child benefit cap. Do you have some sympathy with what she's saying?
Look, I think the reason that we have not yet committed to a timescale for the 2.5, we've committed to doing it, we haven't set out the timescale. It's day 3 of a Labour government, but I think we do have to say, how much is it going to cost to do the things that we have been elected to deliver, that were in the mission statement, that are about the NHS and the waiting list, that are about all the other things that people care about? And of course, it's great that we have a government, a Prime Minister and a Defence Secretary, as Stuart says.
Yes, but where's your heart on this? I mean, you served under Jeremy Corbyn, where there was... No, absolutely. You served under Jeremy Corbyn at a time when there was more focus. This isn't a jibe. It's literally when the focus was on more spending and investment in public services. Is that where you are, that those are the priorities you would like to see delivered perhaps before, in terms of any commitments of spending to the voters?
You know, we politicians are very greedy. What we like is everything. We would like to be able to do everything. But what we have to do, if we're not to run out of money and we're not inheriting a great economic backdrop here, what we have to do is we have to look very carefully at each area of spending, at the commitments that we've made, and we've got to try and cut our...
But it is about priorities, because, look, Andrew, you just have to look at defence spending historically since the Second World War. I mean, if you look at the graph there on health and defence spending, defence is the red line, and you can see the crossover there with health, and that has been what's called the peace dividend. The spending on health has gone up and up, apart from that dip you can see there at the end, but it still hasn't come close to defence spending, and that was because of the pandemic, or during the pandemic. The Cold War, of course, was there, and again, you can see it dim. Are we at the end of the peace dividend? Are we going to have to see some sort of, if not reversal, then closing?
We are certainly at the end of the peace dividend. It is a really, really dangerous world out there, and if Putin wins in Ukraine, it won't be Ukraine as the last place he goes to. This is going to get worse and worse and worse, and we really do, I think, have to spend a lot more on defence, and we have to do it quite quickly.
Right, but what's got to give? Because, again, when you look at that, does that mean health spending has to come down?
I think Labour constricted itself really, really tightly during the election campaign on borrowing and tax, and they pretended to the rest of us you could get everything you wanted. You get great, big, new, shiny hospitals and fantastic public services and rebuild our defences with no extra tax and no extra borrowing. And an awful lot of clever people at the time didn't buy it, and I didn't buy it. I'm not particularly clever, but I think a lot of voters didn't. And that chicken is coming home to roost rather loudly.
Barry?
Well, I agree that there are a huge number of things that we need to do, and a very limited pot.
Was it unwise to box yourselves in like that?
No. Well, what we said is we gave people a commitment on income tax. We gave people a commitment on VAT. Those were, I think, the right things to do, because it indicated to and national insurance, and it indicated to most of the population, look, we're going to try and make things better for you by improving public services, but not raising the taxes that you are the ones who pay most. Where we will go for increasing our funding is by growing the economy, and we'll then have selected areas where the rich have to grow it by a lot. The burden.
As you know, Noah, briefly.
I was just going to say, I don't think a commitment to public services and a commitment to national security are mutually exclusive. I think the Labour Party, the Labour Press Office was so... they were very clever with their language on taxes, in the sense that they absolutely did not rule out very specific tax rises that we will all see very shortly, capital gains being one. They might play around with inheritance tax as well. And I think these are the mechanisms that Rachel Reeves will use to fulfil both commitments to national security and to bolstering the NHS, both bolstering schools as well. So I think we'll see the Labour Party tackle both issues with an equal amounts of passion through tax rises, and through the tax rises they very specifically did not rule out.
Well, there's another shadow hanging over the NATO summit in Washington. Let's just have a look at the headline in the Washington Post. First of all, Hill Democrats remain divided on Biden, with one senator fearing Trump landslide. And this is Senator Michael Bennet, Colorado, called Biden's decision a moral issue about the future of the country. And that is the health and state of Joe Biden. He was hosting last night in the very grand Mellon Auditorium. We can show you here, obviously welcoming other world leaders and all his guests at the launch of the NATO summit, 75th anniversary there with Jens Stoltenberg. But of course, all the questions are about him. Now, despite his defiance in saying that he is going to be standing as the Democratic candidate, there is a growing call, certainly, for it to be reconsidered or looked at. Yesterday, House and Senate Democrats met privately to discuss the situation. Andrew, is there a situation in which you think Joe Biden will not be the Democratic candidate?
I sincerely hope so. I think this is incredible destructive vanity. And I don't mean to be mean, but he has become a world leader we observe through our fingers. So horrifying are some of his... I don't know what's wrong with him, but he freezes, he loses his words, he stumbles. It's just embarrassing. The Democrats know they need another candidate. As things stand, Donald Trump will be back in the presidency at the end of this year. And that is really down to Joe Biden's pig-headed vanity.
Right. I mean, can it happen, though? I mean, as you say, because
he has to stand down. He has to stand down. His family have to persuade him to stand down, and then the Democrats, for sure, can find another candidate, whether it's Kamala Harris or, as I suspect, somebody else. It can be done, but he has to make the first move.
What do you think? We're seeing pictures of Donald Trump at a campaign event in Florida.
I think it is utterly shameful that he is still in post. He's not just commander-in-chief of the US. He's also got he's also got the West relying on a strong US leader to keep us united, to keep NATO together in the face of the tinderbox Middle East, in the face of Putin. And by staying in his position with his, as Andrew said, whatever health condition he is in, is so selfish. And I think he will go down in history, if he stays on, as one of the worst US presidents of all time because of this decision he is making to stay in post. As Andrew said, his family, his closest advisors, his supporters need to urge him to stand down for the sake of the West.
Do you agree, Barry?
You'll understand, Joe, that with a Labour Prime Minister at the moment in Washington, it would be extremely diplomatic imprudent for me to pass any judgment on the president's state of health or his future. I think I will just pass on this one.
Right, but I mean, but do you think he should still stand? I'm not asking you to talk about his health, or...
You're asking me to make a comment on the future of the American president, which, with a Labour Prime Minister seeking to establish and reaffirm that special relationship, it would be extremely imprudent of me to make any of the remarks that Andrew and Noah have just made.
Well, let me ask you a different question, because Sir Keir Starmer, as you rightly say, is there rubbing shoulders with other world leaders. Do you think other European leaders, particularly, who are struggling at the moment, Emmanuel Macron of France and Olaf Scholz in Germany, will want to try and find out and certainly congratulate Keir Starmer on his stunning victory, and another centrist, as they would see themselves, on how he did it?
Well, I'm sure, I know, in fact, that Keir has made sure he's had phone calls with Macron and all the European leaders. Europe is going through a very difficult time as well, as you well know. The European elections and the rise of far-right parties, the way in which that has taken place, not just in Italy, but in France, with even though the second round of the elections managed to moderate that, it's clear that we are going through a very difficult period in European politics. And it's important, I think, that the centre ground should hold. And I think the role that Keir can play in that is very important.
How do you read the situation?
Well, at the moment, Trump is going to win a majority in the Electoral College, and he's definitely going to bring the Republicans' victory in the Senate and embed their support in the House of Representatives. So you will have all three branches controlled by the Republicans. I think Andrew's right. This is deeply selfish and deeply cynical of the Democratic leadership. There is a historic precedent. I think Lyndon Johnson stood aside in 1968 and obviously died 5 years later in 1973. But the problem the Democrats have is Kamala Harris is deeply unpopular. Gavin Newsom has baggage, the governor of California. There isn't anyone to step in. And I think if you're of the progressive left of centre view, I think you do have a moral duty to understand what might happen if you keep Biden on the ticket. Cognitively, he's not up to the job, and he's certainly not up to the job for another 4 years. And therefore, this is, as Noah said, this isn't just about United States politics. This is about geopolitical issues, the strength of the West against China and Russia. And I think the Democrats need to move quickly. And Dr. Jill Biden has a very special responsibility to say enough is enough.
Well,
Joe, you've been vice president, you've been a long-standing senator, you've given service to your country. The last service is to step aside, go back on your train to Wilmington and let someone else do the job.
Well, it will be down to very close family members because clearly nothing else is working. Can I return to this issue, though? If you look at Joe Biden, Andrew, and you look at Emmanuel Macron, and they're in deadlock from a parliamentary perspective, and Olaf Scholz is struggling in Germany. Is Keir Starmer the sort of centrist that disproves the rule?
Well, he is at the moment. We are out of kilter with the general rhythm of politics in the United States and the continent of Europe, for sure, at the moment. But there is this word they're talking about at the moment, deliverism, which is a good warning for Keir Starmer. Deliverism means you think that if you build enough houses and if you produce wage rises for working people and so forth, you will then get re-elected. Now, Joe Biden has actually overseen a rather successful economy, and delivering those things has not helped him. So there is more to life than deliverism. Of course, he has not delivered on the immigration issue that's dividing America very badly. But I think this points to the importance for Starmer of doing something that he hasn't done very much of yet, which is tell a good story. Be a good storyteller and say to the British people, this is who we are, this is where we're going. We need to have more of that from the Prime Minister.
I mean, Tony Blair, the last Labour leader or Prime Minister, I should say, to win a landslide, already warning that if the new Labour government doesn't, in his words, broadly, deal with immigration or tackle immigration, then it could lead to more of a rise from the populist right and possibly left too.
Yeah, and Tony Blair is absolutely correct. The worst thing Keir Starmer can do at this point, and more broadly the Parliamentary Labour Party, is brush off British people who voted for reform as racist, as people who should be ignored, brush off concerns about immigration or about small boats as unsavoury. I think why Tony Blair was so successful is because he brought so many people along with him. He listened to all views and he didn't disregard them from a sort of snobbish, very hard left-wing perspective, as we saw under Jeremy Corbyn. This is a big issue, and Yvette Cooper and the Home Office really need to get to grips with it. They need to address the demographics of voters who are concerned and tackle it quickly.
Well, I can see Richard Tice, Chairman of Reform UK and Reform UK MP, nodding away there. We're going to talk to you in just a moment, Richard, but just to say you were elected as MP for Boston and Skegness in Lincolnshire. Congratulations to you. And, of course, Nigel Farage, on his 8th attempt, was also elected to Parliament. Here he is making, as you remember at the very beginning of the programme, I talked about his first speech praising the current Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and causing, of course, some controversy.
It's pretty clear to everybody that you act with great neutrality, that you have brought tremendous dignity to the role as Speaker, so we absolutely endorse you entirely for this job. And it is, I must say, in marked contrast to the little man that was there before you and besmirched the office so dreadfully, in doing his best to overturn the biggest democratic result in the history of the country. We support you, sir, fully.
Well, you could hear the mixed response to that in the House of Commons. He was, of course, talking about John Bercow, the previous Speaker. Richard Tice, is that the plan? To be disruptive, controversial, to cause groans in the House of Commons?
Well, it's important, isn't it, to have proper democratic debate and to discuss all issues. And what Nigel said was factually correct. And Lindsay Hoyle will continue to be a great Speaker for the House on behalf of all of the parties, including new parties like ourselves in the House of Commons, elected at a general election for the first time. Delighted to have 5 members there. And, yeah, we plan absolutely to hold the government to account on critical issues that you've just been discussing. For example, the issues of immigration, both lawful and unlawful. They are huge issues that in Boston and Skegness was raised on the doors with me up and down the whole constituency because it's having a significant impact on the quality of people's life, the pressure on housing, the pressure on healthcare and the pressure on wages.
So how are the 5 of you, as you've mentioned, going to work exactly in the Commons? What is the strategy? Are you going to start working at a sort of council level, looking ahead to local elections, I should say? But what is it going to be? Or is it just going to be debating?
It'll be everything. So we will continue to grow the party. We're already looking forward to the county elections next May, for example, which is a big opportunity for us. So we're going to essentially grow the infrastructure, professionalise everything, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of new members joining the party every day. I think we absolutely are a key part of the future of British politics. And, you know, in a sense, the Tory party have deeply damaged themselves.
Yeah.
In many areas, we came second to Labour in about 90 seats. We almost beat Labour in some of their heartlands like Llanelli. So, look, we've got a big job to do, but we absolutely plan to hold the government to account and to present a real, credible alternative.
Are you talking to any Conservative MPs?
Oh, I wouldn't possibly comment on, give a running commentary.
Well, Richard Tice, you've never been coy before.
Yes, I've always said I'm not giving a running commentary on any discussions we have.
Any Tory councillors? Any Tory councillors that you're talking to?
Look, I'm not giving a running commentary on anything like that. But people have my telephone number. They know where to get hold of me.
All right. Well, I'll bear that in mind. But what about the 5 of you falling out? Because there are only 5 of you. Well, hang on. It started even before. I mean, Lee Anderson, one of the Reform UK MPs, called you a pound-shot Nigel Farage back in January. He's now been appointed your chief whip. Do you need a chief whip for 5 of you? Or is it because you might fall out?
Oh, no, come on. Look, I mean, we all work together. We're a great team. We're looking forward to making a real difference in the chamber, in adding to the debate, in holding the government to account. We will work as a team.
All right.
We've been elected to do that job by 4.1 million people have voted to get Reform MPs there, and we're looking forward to doing a good job. We're learning the ropes, some of us just arriving for the first time. It's like being back at school for the first day.
Yes, so that was a little while ago, of course. For all of us, I should say. Let me just show you our guests here, The Guardian headline. I'll be back with you in a moment, Richard. Almost half Tory members want merger with Reform UK, poll suggests, as leadership infighting escalates. Where are you on that, Stuart?
Well, I think Noah's absolutely right to say that you cannot say 4.1 million people that voted Reform are all xenophobic, racist. That's nonsense.
Well,
no one here has said that, but some fringes of the left.
And what about a merger?
I don't think a merger is really going to happen. I think there may be an electoral understanding. I think Labour have got a very difficult situation to inherit, and the difficulty with government is you pull the lever and it doesn't always work, and Labour are going to find that on defence and other issues. So I think there might be an opportunity depending on who the leader is, of course, and the shadow cabinet, as the Parliament goes on, that we do harness the mutual support of each other.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we necessarily buy, as Conservatives, everything Reform have said, but at the
Well,
moment,
then there'd be no point with there being a separate party.
No, exactly. But at the moment, as was said earlier, the Labour Party have benefited from an almost perfect split in the right of centre vote.
Well, we'll come on to that in just. We'll come on to that. But should the Conservatives be focusing on the threat from reform or the Liberal Democrats?
Well, that is the conundrum that the party has, because it does have to look towards a more socially liberal, a more conformist, globalist approach for people in the home counties who are left of centre Tories. But at the same time, the key people that delivered the landslide victory, and polling shows this consistently, in 2019 are people who voted Conservative and are socially conservative, live in small towns, are not socially liberal. And those are the people that might be tempted back to the Conservative Party to enable it to win another 50, 100, 150 seats.
Andrew?
But I think it's very, very dangerous for the Conservatives to assume that Reform voters are natural Tories who can be won back into your column again. An awful lot of people who voted Reform were previous Labour Party voters as well. So this is a complicated thing.
I'm not sure there's poll evidence for that.
There is quite a lot.
I only say that because I think the figure comes to mind is only about 4% of 2019 Labour voters defected to Reform. The vast bulk, well north of 80%, were either mainly Conservative, former Conservative voters, or people that had a small number of people that hadn't voted before.
Well, let me bring in Richard then, because Nigel Farage has said and you probably have too, that you're coming for Labour, but you have sort of helped hand them a whopping great majority.
No, what we've done is we've actually provided proper democratic debate and another option to the British people, and millions
and
like
helped,
that, as you
helped
quite
them win a majority.
Look, the reality is our dreadful electoral system has delivered this. Let's just remember, Labour secured about 500,000 votes less than under Jeremy Corbyn in December 19. So there's no love for Labour. It's just a quirk of our absurd electoral system. But yes, we are coming after Labour because actually millions of traditional Labour voters, socially conservative, don't want mass immigration either, and they don't want net zero. And these things are damaging our growth, they're damaging our quality of life, and they're making people poorer.
Right, well, how
and
are
you that's the message we're going to be banging the drum on.
Yeah, well, let me put that to Barry. How are you going to grapple with that? You yourself said at the beginning it's very shallow, that majority, low vote share, maximum number of seats.
Absolutely right. Look, my view is this, that for the past 20 or so years, we've had a system in this country which has ensured, through first past the post, it's ensured that the left was split, and that allowed the dominance of the Conservative Party. We now have a situation where actually the right have split, and that's allowed a Labour government to come through.
What are you going to do to meet them?
Let me
we haven't got
elaborate.
long on the programme.
And because of that, I think it's very interesting to see that we will now start getting, from people who never supported proportional representation before, we'll start getting these arguments saying, how can it be that 4 million people... Now, I actually believe in the first past the post system, and I'll argue it on the basis of being the constituency link and so on. But I do think that we need to see this increasing fragmentation of British politics, or we don't need to see it, but that I think is what's going to happen, an increasing fragmentation of British politics, and ultimately that's going to lead to more demands for PR.
Yeah, so I completely agree that now Britain is very much a multi-party system, but it is interesting because calls for PR do tend to come from people when it suits them most. It will be, I'll be keeping an eye open, my eyes peeled for whether the Liberal Democrats keep up their big calls for proportional representation now that they've won 70 seats as well.
All the Conservatives?
Yeah.
I don't remember any calls for...
I think historically we do see these calls come from people when it is to their benefit, and the second it's not, that goes away.
And in answer to your question, to Barry, what do Labour need to do about this? It's a very straightforward answer. Deal with mass migration and start to address that in an effective way.
Right, and that will blunt...
But Andrew, if we're going to deal with mass migration, let's be absolutely clear where it comes from, and let's not make people believe in any way that this is about the tiny proportion of net migration that comes from the boat people.
I'm going to say goodbye and thank you to Richard Tice, although he's disappeared off the screen. Thank you to him and thank you to all of our guests for joining me today. I'll be back with more tomorrow at 12:15. Bye-bye.